to soothe my woes and to make sure that I stay in lane from now on is Andy Williams, political commentator. Thank you ever so much for being here.
Good to see you.
After all the years I've been here presenting, I've never actually done that. I've always been sat here, waiting, poised, eyes down the barrel for the green light.
First time for everything. And it's such a beautiful day outside today. It's easy to get distracted looking to your left-hand side.
I know, it's a great
London.
view from Talk Towers, isn't it? Oh, look at the lovely Tower of London. I can think of a few people I'd put in that. Right, let's get on to this really horrific story that's come out during the course of the day, that a prison guard has now had his throat slashed by an inmate in what is another horror attack taking place in a high-security prison. Of course, we know that Axel Rudakabana threw boiling water over a prison guard. Just before that, the brother of the Manchester Arena bomber managed to get hold of, was it hot oil? And now a prison guard has actually had their throat slashed by an inmate. This is in HMP Woodhill in Milton Keynes, which happens to be the prison where Tommy Robinson is currently being held, having been moved from Belmarsh. But you do have to wonder what is going on in our prisons. They seem to be run by gangs. They seem to be utterly lawless at this point.
They do, and I think we need to distinguish firstly between the people in our prisons who we need to be working not just to punish, and that's why they're there in the first place, but also to rehabilitate them. And there are many people in our prisons who are capable of rehabilitation and who could come out and actually lead successful, meaningful lives. But we also have to accept that there are some of them who won't. And as I understand it, the person who committed this attack today is detained under the Terrorism Act.
Right.
So the chances are that this is somebody who's probably not likely to
who may well be
rehabilitated.
motivated by a particular viewpoint.
Yeah, a particular viewpoint, whatever that is. And I don't know, I'm not an expert on the prison system, but what is absolutely clear is that it's completely broken. And this government has a really significant opportunity, and actually an imperative, to completely, from the ground up, reform our justice system. And we've seen in, I think, the last few minutes, an announcement that Labour is going to build 3 prisons a year, every year over the course of this Parliament. That's long overdue. We had 14 years of a government that didn't build, it barely built any prison places, despite constantly announcing programmes to build prison places. So clearly we need that to happen, but that's only one piece of the puzzle. It's not just about space, although, as you said at the top, there kind of is no space left, or almost no space left, which is remarkable. That is forcing a government, and what an invidious position to be in. It's forcing a government into a position where they're having to look at the people in our prisons and decide who is the least dangerous, what's the least dangerous cohort of people to release. Yeah. And we shouldn't be in that position, but what's the alternative?
But this is the thing, you know, whenever the government feels that they want to move quickly, they can. When it came to the trials of people in the Southport riots, they managed to rush them all through pretty quickly and stick them on telly box for the world to watch. When it came to COVID, we had Nightingale courts then and Nightingale hospitals. And you ask yourself, well, how do we get to a situation when it's quite clear people in the civil service know what the prison capacity is, they know that it's woefully understaffed, but also the rising threat of violence? Why aren't prison guards better protected? Why aren't they better armed?
I really don't. I honestly don't know. I really, really don't know the answer to that. But clearly, we know, we've heard all sorts of anecdote. I don't have the stats, but there's all sorts of anecdotal evidence about, you talk about gangs in prisons, about prisons that are run basically by gangs selling drugs, people smuggling weapons into prisons. How is that happening? And is it a question of looking again at the job of a prison officer or a prison guard and better incentive? I don't know what an average prison guard is paid, for example, but I imagine it's not brilliant. Maybe we need to be paying those people more, training them better, having more of them. The problem is, the solution to so many of these problems with our broken public services is more money.
But, you know, someone said to me the other day, and I can't remember who, but I thought it sounded like a very sensible policy. Why don't we use army veterans to go and staff prisons? You know, give them a role
there.
Well,
if they want to do that.
If they wanted to.
If they want to.
But it does seem to me that, do you know, I must admit, part of me thinks that a lot of the problems we're now facing, we reap what we sow, is all part of this sort of be kind movement, where prison has to be as comfortable as it is to live in the outside world, that people have to have access to kitchens and PlayStations and televisions. I mean, look, we don't know anything about this case. You can fashion a blade from all sorts of innocuous materials. But certainly when you know, going back to the brother of the Manchester Arena bomber and the fact that he managed to cook up his cocktail of injury in a kitchen, Why on earth has he got access to a kitchen?
I don't think it's to do with being soft on people or anything like that at all. I think this is about a long period of, a decade and a half plus of underinvestment in a public service. That's what it comes down to. We're clearly not investing in the staff, in training, in salaries, in building these prisons. If you want a prison system that works, and what does a prison system that works look like? It looks like deterring people, it looks like punishing them appropriately, and it looks like rehabilitating as many of them as you can. And we know that Britain has, I think, the highest prison population in Europe. It has one of the highest reoffending rates. I mean, those are two very important metrics on which we're completely failing. So I don't think it's about being too soft or too kind. I think it's about massive underinvestment.
I mean, what we also know is that 10% of our prison population are foreign born, and there'll be people out there who are saying, why are we putting them up at His Majesty's pleasure at the cost of 40 odd grand a year minimum when we know we don't have enough prison spaces? Why are these people not being sent back to their home countries?
So I don't think that's the right thing to do, but I do think that going forward as part of this immigration white paper, which, by the way, I think contains, maybe we can talk about the rhetoric in a bit, but that I think it contains a number of very sensible measures in that paper. One thing, I think it's Sweden, but I might have got the wrong Scandinavian country, have just introduced a law that says you can only come into this country from elsewhere as an immigrant, as a legal immigrant, if you don't have a criminal record. If you have a clean bill of health. That just, I think the vast majority of people would think that is a sensible thing to do.
You'd wonder why that wasn't in place already.
It's amazing. I mean, and actually I've talked on this show before about how I didn't know until one of Reform's 5 MPs entered Parliament with a conviction for domestic violence that you could become an MP and have been to prison, but it turns out you can. So just if we're we should set that standard for MPs, we should set that standard for people who come into our country as well.
Although, hold on, you were talking about the rehabilitation of prisoners. When it comes to James McMurdoch, who I know, and he seems to be a lovely man, who's very repentful over what happened when he was, years ago, when he was essentially a teen and he did 2 weeks in a youth detention centre, and he's turned his life around. He's a married man with 5 kids, was a very successful, worker, and I think in the City of London. And so surely, actually, when it comes to a positive rehabilitation story and representation, that should be perfectly okay.
So I don't know James McMurdoch, so I can't comment on his character, but what I would say is that we have to hold our politicians to a higher standard. Now, we shouldn't be writing people off and saying, well, you can't have a career anymore, and as you say, he's had a successful career in the city or whatever, but I do think that if you have a criminal record, that should disbar you from entering Parliament.
Certainly when it comes to allowing people into the country, you would think you'd want to do a background check, so you know who they are, what they might be here planning to do. You said that you saw a lot of good stuff in the immigration white paper, so let's talk about that before we get on to talking about the language, because having looked through it myself, what struck me is where they were able to make some plans or put forward concrete proposals. They've done this. It's the sort of mood music you've heard before, and I don't know how efficient it's going to be at significantly bringing down numbers. On a lot of the stuff that people really do care about, there was just no structure of delivery. You know, when they spoke about we're going to sort of stop the blocking of deportations for stupid reasons. Okay, how? By what mechanism? Because unless you're going to rescind power from the ECHR and the Supreme Court and pluck out a load of case precedent and potentially the Human Rights Act, I don't quite understand how that's going to be done. And then also lip service being paid to things such as integration. Okay, how?
Well, on integration, I think we clearly need a proper strategy. I don't believe that multiculturalism is a failed experiment. I think it can work, but I think you can't just let it happen, or you can't just hope it's going to happen. There needs to be initiatives in place that actually facilitate and foster that.
Like what?
Well, I'm not I'm not doing government policy in the Home Office. But if I was, I'm pretty sure I'd have a team of people working on that full time. I think that's really important.
But this is the problem. They that was one of their 5 big take homes. And if you're there living in a city in the UK, like in Leicester, where in some parts of Leicester, more than half of the population don't even speak English, you live in a neighbourhood that's become balkanised.
And Starmer, by the way, in his speech, he spoke about saying, a fundamental, a kind of base level prerequisite for coming to the UK should be you should be able to speak the language.
Right. But then it doesn't really go that far to explain what you're going to do when it comes to neighbourhoods where there is no community cohesion. And frankly, there's not particularly any will for community cohesion, because if people can come to this country, live as an economic migrant without learning the language, with people from their own backgrounds. And today, in this day and age, with the power of Zoom and with mobile phones and with the internet and television, you can watch the news from back home, you can communicate with your family from back home, you can eat the food from back home. There's no real challenge to have to try and integrate. And I say this frankly as somebody who has lived abroad a lot myself, and in countries where I could integrate, countries like Ghana, like Kenya, like India even, where I became very much a fabric of where I lived, great. But when I lived in China, I didn't speak any Chinese.
Right.
And very few people in Shanghai can speak English. And also the cultures are so different. There wasn't really a sort of going out and have a drink after work culture. And so naturally I found a load of other people who were there teaching English as a foreign language. And so what do you end up doing? You end up going to somewhere that you know because it's, something crudely based on a UK pub with the other Brits.
Of course, and I don't.
It's normal and human to want to do that, but it's not very constructive.
It's not. I don't think we can go as far as we can't force people to live their lives in a particular way. But what we can do is ensure that, for example, if you're coming to this country with a family, you make sure your children go to school, and particularly your daughters, which we know doesn't happen all the time. But
would you agree with faith schools? Because I think they need to be abolished, because that to me seems segregation of children at a very young age based on religion.
I'm not in favour of faith schools of any kind. I'm not. I went to a Church of England primary school. It was very chilled, liberal type place, but I'm still not in favour of it. I don't think we should have any schools that say this is actually the guiding light, and I'm not in favour of that at all.
I'd keep Church of England and Catholic schools because it's the religion of this country. But I would probably abolish all the others.
I don't know how you can. I don't know how. I think that's a really tricky argument to make. I think you either have a problem with faith schools.
No.
Or you
don't have a problem with faith schools which aren't of the nation's faith. I think it's perfectly adequate to say this is a country for 2,000 years that's been built on Judeo-Christian values, and we want to uphold that because it's the glue that held our society together. Now, look, most schools back in the day, I don't know what goes on in schools now, but had religious-themed school assemblies, but it didn't turn people into sort of Christian zealots. It was just part of the fabric of the teaching of the school. And I saw no harm in that, and I don't see anything wrong with being able to say that's our nation. In the same way, if you went to Saudi Arabia or a Muslim country, they might have Muslim-themed schools, but they wouldn't have a Christian school or a Hindu school.
Very different society, and we know that Britain is pretty much a secular nation these days, right? Like we know that if you look at Christianity, for example, I don't know what the latest stats are, but not many people are going to church. It's not a massively prevalent part of our society. Of course, it is around. We organise the calendar around it, we organise holidays around it, and that's important.
Our democracy is based on it. Our morality is based on it. Our views of women's and then their rights are based on it.
But I would say, you either have faith schools and you allow people to set up faith schools across all faiths, or you don't. And I'm in favour of
I don't see why we have to suddenly make all other religions and cultures equal to our own domestic one. I think you can quite happily promote and celebrate and maintain your own culture as a country without having to put all others from foreign climes on an equal footing. To me, that makes no sense.
Not really about that for me. It's more about, is it a good idea, or is it ideal to stratify children in that way by saying this is the thing you all need to believe, these are the teachings you need, and don't listen to these because it's only this. I'm not massively in favour of that. But to come back to the immigration white paper, what I thought was, in terms of the measures that are in it, what I thought was positive about it is that so much of the chat and the rhetoric about immigration in this country is about small boats. And I understand why people are particularly exercised about that, because it's illegal migration and we don't know where these people are coming from, and we know that it's expensive to put them up when they come here, etc., etc. All the things that are discussed all the time. But that's only 4.8% of migration into Britain. 95% of migration every year into Britain, or at least last year, was legal migration.
Right.
And if I remember rightly, when we had the Brexit referendum, one of the major drivers of that Brexit vote was that there was a significant group of people, clearly majority of people in this country, who thought, actually, we've let too many people in over too long a period of time, and it started to alter the fabric of our country. And last year, 720,000 net migration. It's an enormous number, and before that, I think it was 900. And before that, it was about 700 again. So in the last 3 years, 2 million new people net have come into Britain. But we're not talking about the Brexit deal that Boris Johnson did that actually increased net migration massively, we focus all of our attention on small boats. This white paper is about saying the amount of legal migration, and this is Labour, by the way. Labour are saying, Labour that's always been the party of migration, basically.
Yeah.
We know that Blair was very in favour of it. I'm a Blairite. I'm in favour of it. But most people aren't. So Labour has shifted massively its position. And one thing I found very strange over the past 48 hours is all of the people who've been bashing Starmer and Yvette Cooper for years and saying they're too soft, they're too this, too that, the moment they actually come out with the rhetoric that is totally in line with those people's views, they still don't like it. It's almost as though they'll never give Keir Starmer credit for anything.
Arguably, though, the biggest backlash has actually come from within his own party, with people saying, we don't like the words that you use, particularly when he discussed the island of strangers. Now, whoever started this saying, did this come from Enoch Powell's speech? I doubt that. You know, I really don't believe a speechwriter sat there and went, oh, I know, let's comb through the rivers of blood speech, take out passages and reword them. Why would they? I just can't see any upside why anyone would do that.
I know people who work in Keir Starmer's team and around Keir Starmer's team, and trust me, they are not reading Enoch Powell's speeches.
But this is the mad thing. They're all jumping up now, aren't they? The usual suspects going, this is hateful language, it's divisive, it's going to make people feel very upset. What? Talking about island of strangers. We cannot do anything about immigration without some Egypt turning around and saying, this is racist, this is xenophobic, watch your language. That's what really sticks in my craw. And frankly, the London mayor should put a sock in it and remember he might be in charge of London, but he's not running that Labour Party, and he should actually show an iota of party discipline rather than jumping on the bandwagon and attacking the Prime Minister.
Well, Sadiq has a long track record of using his kind of independence from Westminster to criticise the Labour leadership and the Labour government, you know, as he sees fit. And Andy Burnham does the same, by the way. Burnham, who I think is a massively overrated politition.
I always thought he seemed like one of the better ones. Is it?
Is disingenuous, I think. But anyway, that's a whole different debate. But they use their independence to intervene when they want to. I broadly agree with Sadiq Khan here, in the sense that, as I say, I think there were lots of important measures in that paper. I think they're sensible. I think you will see immigration come down as a result.
So what are you agreeing with Sadiq Khan?
Well, he said they're not the words I'd use. And I do agree with that, because I think language in politics really matters. And I both not quite morally, but in terms of, I don't think that language. I find it slightly unedifying.
I just cannot, in a million years, even if I really exercise myself, even if I really try and understand what is divisive about island of strangers, I can't find anything in it. We're an island, yes, and if people don't know each other because they're not saying hello to each other on the street, they're strangers. What is so divisive about saying island of strangers?
I just think it's unnecessary, and it's a bit exclusionary.
I think it is words.
And I think it's but words matter, and language matters in politics. It does. But putting that aspect to one side, I actually think strategically, from a political standpoint, I think this is mad politics, because what's very transparent. I mean, the immigration white paper was always coming. So people who said, oh, they're only rushing this out now because of the local election results.
Right.
I mean, you don't understand politics.
Yeah.
That's just, you don't rush a white paper out in 9 days. That's not how it works. This was always coming. But the language and the rhetoric, undoubtedly, is driven by reform and its surge in popularity. And Nigel Farage.
Of strangers.
But it is exactly the sort of thing Farage would say.
I wake up every day. I think it's quite a nice turn of phrase.
What?
You know, we don't want to be an island of strangers. I wake up every day and the goalposts have moved as to what is acceptable and what isn't. And all the while, we've got the whole assisted dying bill going through Parliament and being discussed. And everyone just talks about our dignity in dying without mentioning we don't fund hospices, instead of saying this is state-sanctioned killing.
But I don't think Sadiq Khan, and this is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's unacceptable or disgraceful or racist or xenophobic, which some people are on the left. They absolutely are on the hard left. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I think it's a bit unnecessary, pretty unpalatable. I wouldn't have said it. But also I'm saying strategically, from a political standpoint, it doesn't make sense.
I'm really struggling, Andy, right? And I think you're such a bright man and such a nice man that I just want someone to explain to me. Because have I gone mad? that I'm the only person sitting here who cannot see that there's anything, even if I try hard, anything wrong with Island of Strangers. Can you explain to me why that's upsetting people?
It depends on your view of society. Some people think we're all just we're atomised. We're all just a bunch of individuals who should go about our own business, sink or swim. You know, if you have a terrible life, nearly swore there, shouldn't do that. If you have a terrible life, it's your own fault. Tough. And if you're a migrant, tough. And actually, I've seen footage in the last few days.
But surely he's pointing out that's what we don't want to be. He's saying we don't want to be. We've become an island of strangers, and we shouldn't be. So yeah. What's wrong with that?
Because it doesn't speak to a society that a centre-left politician should want to build, which is.
So what should he have said instead?
Well, I just don't think he should have said that. I think he should.
Island of Strangers.
I think he should. I think. Rather than these kind of slightly dodgy, ill-thought-through sound bites, I think we need to be making an argument about, on economic terms, on societal terms, about why we need cohesion, integration, and a shared sense of purpose. He could have said, what we need is a shared sense of purpose. I mean, that's not brilliant rhetoric. I've come up with it off the top of my head. But it's better than saying, oh, you know, we risk. I just think it's a bit gross.
I'm afraid, Andy, you haven't convinced me at all. I still don't get, you know, of all the things, all the words that people could be upset about, I still don't get why anyone would be upset about that.
I've heard far worse things said in politics. Don't get me wrong. It's by no means.
Far worse things said to me on X on a regular basis.
You can see my feed.
by a platform of strangers hiding behind a stranger avatars. That's all I've got you for, isn't it?
That's it.
Oh, it's brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much for joining me, and don't be a stranger.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, I see what I did there.
Appreciate it. Very good.
Boom, boom. That's where they pay me the big bucks.